that they're going to get the job at all, but it's just about putting those factors into the mix, so they're giving themselves the best chance. Now, somebody has just said, how can students get to know the company culture? Well, this is the importance of talking to the employer at job fairs, of understanding company culture and thinking about company culture when they go on internships. They can't necessarily do anything about whether they match or not the company culture, but they can certainly find out about it. And the chances are that if they know more about the company culture, is it a very rigid structure, very top down, very hierarchical, or is it a much more everybody's, sorry, I got a wasp, everybody's gets on with their own jobs, and it's very autonomous, and it's very laissez-faire, it's very relaxed, and everybody takes responsibility, but they all work very hard, but in a more relaxed way. So they can find out about the company culture by talking to the employer at a job fair. They can also find out about the company culture probably in a more realistic way by trying to talk to somebody that works there, and that's about exploiting their network. Their network might not have somebody who works there, but they might have somebody who knows somebody who works there. Yeah. So it's about linking in with that. The best way would be to talk to somebody who actually works there. What's it really like working for, government department? Why? What does it feel like when you're in there? So at least they're aware of the company culture. They can pick things up, obviously, from the public information that's on the internet, from the company reports and that sort of thing. Somebody else has asked, great, good, I'm getting some questions down here, and I've got my chat open, which is even better, so I'm actually reading them while I'm going through. A soft skills universally needed for employers. We will come on to soft skills a bit later on today, and you'll see the evidence for that from the tracer studies where they've spoken to employers. So the answer is yes, yeah. Not necessarily, some soft skills are more important for some employers than others, but essentially, yes, employers want soft skills. They're very important, yeah, to employers. Okay, so I just wanted to share something with you about company culture. So here we go. I'll put this up on the Moodle afterwards, so you can read this at your leisure. It's only a short article, but it's a recent article. March this year, and obviously based on sort of substantial research across the globe, and found how important cultural fit is for employers. Yeah, more important than skills. So, how well a candidate will fit into the team dynamic and wider company culture is much more important. Yeah. So there you go. It's not just me that's saying it. There's substantial research that shows how important culture is. Okay. Wanted to move on from culture now and talk about something called unconscious bias. Because everybody has unconscious bias. We might like to think that we don't judge people unreasonably, but we actually do. That employers are no different from anybody else, so they tend to do that. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about unconscious bias and how your students can sort of help to, well, understand unconscious bias, but also sort of handle it and deal with unconscious bias. So I'm going to talk through a presentation about unconscious bias. And just to give you an example, unconscious bias means you don't know you're doing it. And bias basically means that you kind of like either have either a positive or a negative perception, which isn't based on reality, which isn't based on true facts. So to give you an example, I put an example in the handbook, but my full name is Pamela. If I went for a job, it may be that a recruiter's internal unconscious dialogue, so this is unconscious, he or she doesn't realize quite what they're doing, but this is kind of what's happening in their brain, okay, this candidate is called Pamela. So I'm there, going for my interview. I once worked with a Pamela who was really horrible. She was really not a nice person to work with. She was very awkward and very difficult. And this Pamela might have the same characteristics. Now, of course, I'm called the same name as this other Pamela, who wasn't very nice. But there's no reason why I should have the same characteristics as they do. So it's very unreasonable to think like this. But this is kind of the processes that are going on in the back of everybody's mind, because we don't know people when you first meet them at a job interview. So you automatically start making assumptions about people without actually there being evidence-based. And as you get to know the person better, then you revise those assumptions and you change your view of somebody. But because the employer doesn't know the candidate, they still have those unconscious biases. And it's up to the candidate really to sort of help to break those down through building links with the organisation. I talked about sort of, if you know somebody in the organisation, if you're known, then you've got a much better chance, because the chances are those unconscious bias things aren't coming in quite the same way. Okay, so let me just talk you through presentation of unconscious bias, which has now disappeared off my screen. Here we go. Okay. So I'll try and put this on full screen. Here we go, unconscious bias. So unconscious, so we don't know we're doing it. It's not done deliberately or knowingly. In my example, this person wasn't making bad assumptions about me because they were thinking, if they were thinking rationally, they'd think, well, that's a silly thing. It's not, we shouldn't be doing that. But it's unconscious. We don't do it deliberately. We don't do it knowingly. And bias is this inclination to treat in a particular way. It can be positive. It can be negative. Yeah. But in this case, we're particularly interested in when it's negative. So we all have unconscious bias. We all use our previous experiences to make judgments and to make sense of the world based on what we previously have experienced. So it's important that employers handle their unconscious bias, and most employers will do that because employers want the best person for the job, or they should do. They don't necessarily want the best person that their unconscious bias thinks is best for the job. That's not a rational thing. So it's important for employers to deal with their unconscious bias, but it's also important that job applicants, your students, know about unconscious bias and how it could influence recruiters and their decisions about who to offer a job to, so that they're aware of it and they can take steps to make sure that they are judged on their true characteristics, their true skills, their true qualifications, their true soft skills and personality, and not on unconscious bias. So you've got to remember that when in the normal situation, when somebody goes to an interview, the recruiter, the employer, has probably only seen them on paper. So they're very two-dimensional. They don't really come across as a three-dimensional person with, a sense of humour or a shyness or whatever. They're very two-dimensional. They can't really make a judgment about what that person's like because they've only seen it written down on paper. And so obviously unconscious bias can come in at that stage. So there's lots of different characteristics that could be susceptible to unconscious bias. And I'm just going to go through a couple of examples. There is a paper about all the different types of unconscious bias. I don't think you need to worry your students about all the different types. It's just that it's kind of the concept and what to do about it. But typically, we all, employers included, tend to prefer people that are like ourselves. So employers tend to employ people that are like themselves. So that might be it might be their ethnicity, it might be their class, it might be something as simple as they went to the same university. It may be that they dress in a similar way to them. It may be that they come from the same particular area of a city that the employer knows or has affinity with. So it can be lots of different things, which has nothing to do with being able to do the job properly or not. They're just unconscious biases. So that's affinity or similarity bias. Another bias is attribution biased. So this is where an employer makes a quick judgment about applicants which is not based on the evidence. So, for example, let's just think of an example about that. So, for example, the thing down there I've said is they took, I don't know, 5 years of their getting their degree instead of 4. And if that's not explained, the employer might think that's because they were lazy, whereas it could have been because they had a health crisis, or they had family caring responsibilities, or their family ran out of money and they had to stop and work for a year. And actually it could show that the student was very, very serious about their studies and very diligent, or a very responsible member of their family. So it could have been a positive thing as opposed to a negative thing. So attribution bias, I mean, a typical one that you see is that there are some people who are very good at interviews. They come across very well. You describe them as being very personable. And they tend to get jobs. They tend to come across as very articulate. And the employer tends to judge that they're the best person for the job because of the way they've behaved in the interview, not because they genuinely have the best skills, the best attributes, the best experience. It's because they came across well at interview. And that's quite a common one. So those are just some examples of unconscious bias. So that's some things which employers look at. But if you look at the research evidence, there's also a number of characteristics that are completely unrelated to how well somebody can do a job, which actually end up, favouring these sorts of candidates. So, for example, tall people, the unconscious bias says they're more competent, they're healthy, they're employable, and they get employed. So tall people have greater chance of being employed. If somebody is attractive, then attractive people earn more. This is based on scientific research. It's not, it's not sort of imagined. This is what actually happens in the workplace. And this again is an example of unconscious bias operating through the workplace. The name and address of somebody, because that leads to assumptions about ethnicity, maybe about family background, maybe about social background, then that can lead to people being appointed or people not being appointed. And gender, a big one. Both male and female recruiters prefer male candidates. So if you're a male candidate, you have a greater chance of being appointed than a female candidate. Though clearly there's no reason why you should be any better or any worse at doing the job. Also age, and it typically in my country it would be somebody who's older, although it's a protected characteristic at the minute, which means that it's illegal to discriminate against somebody on the basis of age. But quite often an employer will kind of think, well, this is a job which is a fairly junior job, it should be done by a younger person. And if somebody who's slightly older comes along and does it, they think, oh, well, maybe they won't stay very long, maybe they won't fit into the role. But it could be also that your students come across as being very young and very inexperienced, and perhaps they're too young for this job that they're going for. So these are all ways of unconscious bias. So how do you deal with it? Okay, so employers and recruiters should be aware of unconscious bias, and they should have recruitment approaches which try to ensure that everybody gets a fair chance. But applicants need to be aware of unconscious bias and try to reduce its impact. So making sure that their CVs, their letters of applications and application forms are done absolutely excellently. Yeah, so they sort of put themselves ahead of the game to start off with. They should also try and ensure that these documents try to present a more three-dimensional picture of themselves. So we talked previously about how students can enrich their CV, by putting in just a little bit more detail around their interests to sort of turn them into three-dimensional people in terms of their interest, rather than sort of the flat two-dimensional one. But also making sure that any experience they've got anything that they've done that they can sort of claim has developed their soft skills, that has demonstrated their leadership skills, for example, making sure their CVs are as enriched as possible, and making sure that there's not unexplained things in their CVs which might look negative and might be interpreted negatively, and if they're there, that they explain those. And this is another reason for making the contact with the employer, being known by the employer. So trying to make some sort of contact, maybe before or alongside their application. So you take students out on visits. There's employers, there's people there that work for organisations that they could be chatting to. Your students have internships. You have job fairs. So those are all opportunities for the students to make a contact with somebody who they're interested in as working for, so they become known as a person as opposed to being a sheet of paper. Also preparing for interviews very carefully, and interviews we do in the next module. So we'll talk then about how to create a good initial impression, which is very important in an interview, but also how to give a real impression at the interview during the actual interview process. Because the more information, the more understanding that you have about someone, the more likely you are to, as an employer, as a recruiter, to make a more accurate judgment about that person. So the less you're relying on your unconscious bias, as it were. Okay. So that's unconscious bias. I will, oh dear, sorry. Right, got you back again. Okay, so I'll put that, the PowerPoints, I've got a couple of PowerPoints, so I'll put both of them onto the Moodle, so you've got access to these afterwards. So just talking a bit more about how employers sift candidates, how they make it through, how they assess letters of application and CVs and application forms. Obviously, in an ideal world, employers will take they'll take time to read every CV, every letter of application, to mark them carefully and to sort of have a pile of potential, a shortlist pile. They'll sift through them very carefully. But in the real world, there's a lot of applicants and very few jobs, and they may have very little time to actually go through each application. So in the real world, the chances are that the recruiter will go through the CVs, the letter of application, the application forms quite quickly and make decisions quite quickly about whether to take them further forward. In some cases, they will even use digital solutions. So particularly if somebody's filled in an application form online, but not necessarily just online, then actually it may never be read by a person at all. It may simply be rejected by the algorithm that's set up in the application form. So this is one, we did talk about this before when we were doing application forms. That's why students must always be careful to use the keywords that are in the person specification, in the job description, and include them with in any electronic application, because it could be set, the algorithm could be set that if they haven't mentioned somewhere that they're a good team player, they don't get through. Yeah, so it could be automatically being rejected without even being read by anybody. So they might use an automatic solution to sifting out the CVs. They can also use things like the CV is too long, or the email address of the candidate is not a professional email address. So, littlepony@gmail.com doesn't come across as being very professional if you want to get a job in banking, for example. Yeah. So silly things like that. We talked about grammatical errors and spelling mistakes. Yeah. But things which really don't impact on the students, on the applicant's ability to actually be a good candidate for the job. All of those can lead to the letter of application CV being rejected at that point. You know, another thing that might happen, which your candidates, your students can't do anything about, is that they might have actually criteria that they haven't put out in the job advert, in the person description, in the job description. So, for example, my sister works for a legal company, and when they are recruiting legal personnel, they won't consider anybody who hasn't been to Oxford or Cambridge. They don't say that in the job application, in their adverts. They don't say, don't bother applying unless you've been to Oxford or Cambridge University. But that's what happens at the sifting point. So these things happen. It may be that they want everybody who's got a first-class honours degree. Yeah. So, you know, if they said that, then people who had a second would know not to bother applying, but they don't say that. So that's the way it is, I'm afraid. And that's why, yet another reason for students to find out a bit more informally before they even sort of start becoming interested in the employer, about the employer. So really the onus is on students, it's on the applicants to make sure their applications are the best that they can be. Okay, I just wanted to pause there and just to sort of revisit some of those sorts of concepts. I wanted to give you a little quiz. So we're going to try out a quiz online. So I'm going to give you a question, yeah, and I'll give you options for the answers, and you have to say whether you think it's A, B, C, or D. So there's only 5 questions, but you might want to write down, just jot down what your response is. Normally I would do this on a sort of poll in Zoom, but because we're not on Zoom, I can't do that. Okay, so the question is, how long do recruiters on average spend looking at a CV? How long will a recruiter spend looking at a CV? And your options are A, 5 minutes, B, 2 minutes, C, 30 seconds, or D, 5 to 7 seconds. I'm going to do all 5 questions and then we'll go through the answers. So is that okay? Can I move on? Have I been slow enough? Yeah? Is that all right? So jot down your answers. That was number 1. The average time spent by recruiters looking at the resume. Is it A, 5 minutes, B, 2 minutes, C, 30 seconds, or D, 5 to 7 seconds? Okay, number 2 then. Okay. This is about whether applicants are actually qualified in terms of the person specification for the job that they're applying for. So what percentage of applicants actually qualified for the jobs they apply for? Is it A, 100%, B, 75%, C, 50%, or D, 35%? So what percentage of applicants are actually qualified? Do they actually meet the person specification for the jobs they're applying for? Is it A, 100%, B, 75%, C, 50%, or D, 35%? Okay, this is a statement and you have to say whether it's true or false. So over 75% of CVs are discarded because of an unprofessional email address. Over 75% of resumes or CVs are discarded because of an unprofessional email address of the applicant. Is that true or is that false?
Excuse me, Dr. Pam.
Yeah.
Should we answer through the chat box or through the survey
Just do it yourselves on a bit of paper.
Okay.
Yeah, just do it on a bit of paper.
Okay.
Because we want to go through the answers now. Yeah. So just do it on a bit of paper and you can mark yourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the score is not important. It's just fun. Okay. Okay. In terms of social media profile, I think we talked when we were doing how to find a job about the importance of student social media profile. So how many, this is another ABCD percentage question. What percentage of recruiters are likely to look at a candidate's social media profile? Is it A, 50%? So will 50% look at the social media profile of their applicants? Is it B, 70%? Is it D, 80%? Or is it D, 90%? Okay, and the last question, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, last question. So, I talked about this automatic sifting of electronic applications. This is known as applicant tracking software. So, using applicant tracking software, where automatically your CV is read and either goes to the next stage or is rejected. So applicant software, what percentage of applications does it tend to reject? Is it A, 25%, B, 50%, C, 75%, or D, 90%? So what percentage of CVs get rejected through the applicant tracking software? As I say, this is just a bit of fun, but it's more than a bit of fun because it's illustrating how you could use this sort of information with your students to have a bit of a fun quiz. But of course, the purpose of the quiz is not to get the right answer. It's to actually think about the issues that we're asking about. Yeah. So that's kind of the point. So it doesn't matter about getting the right answer. The important thing is engaging with the issues. So let's go through and just do the answers. And I won't, well, unless you want to shout out answers, feel free if you want to, but I won't ask you. The average time, so number one, the average time spent by recruiters looking at a CV, yeah, because the options were 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 30 seconds, or 5 to 7 seconds. Well, unfortunately, the answer is the last one. It's 5 to 7 seconds, which is pretty shocking when you think about how much effort applicants go into in writing their CVs and doing a nice letter of application and sending it off. And this just kind of gives a picture of the amount of effort on one side compared to the amount of time on the other, and how little the opportunity is to make an impression with an employer. So, obviously not every employer does that, but that's what the research shows. So it's 5 to 7 seconds. Hence, if you've got any spelling mistakes, if your CV is difficult to read, if it's too long, you haven't got a hope. You have not got a hope of getting through to the next stage. 5 to 7 seconds. That's the amount of time a recruiter, on average, will spend looking. Okay, so the next question was about the percentage of applicants actually qualified for the jobs they applied to. And the options were 100%, 75%, 50%, or 35%. Well, you might think that the answer would be, well, you wouldn't apply for a job unless you're qualified to do it. So you might think, well, maybe 75% or 100%, of people who apply for a job are actually qualified. They actually meet the person specification. But the answer is actually the last one. A third, 35% of applicants actually fulfill the person specification. So that is pretty sobering thought, but it also means that applicants and candidates and students need to think, well, they don't have to meet all the person specifications in order to think about doing a job. I mean, obviously, they need to be reasonable about it, but if only 30% are actually qualified, that means that, getting on for 70%, 65% haven't got all the attributes. And an interesting fact that's not down here also is that there's a gender divide on this one, that men tend to look at the person specification and think, oh, I can do 50% of that, or I've got 50% of those things in the person specification, so I'll apply for the job, I've got a good chance. Women will look at that and think, oh, I only meet 50% of those specifications, therefore I won't bother applying. So straight away, women tend to put themselves at a disadvantage because they don't apply, whereas the equivalent man would do with the same background, because of their different way of looking at things. So I thought that's quite interesting. Okay, so the next question was the true or false one, and I said, are over 3/4 of resumes discarded? 76% of resumes discarded for an unprofessional email address. That's true. Yeah. So if your students have got a silly email address, bighulk@yahoo.com, it doesn't matter about wherever they're at, the domain name, but they need to have a sensible email address they're going to use for job applications. They need to have something which is based on their name. It's something sensible. Okay, next one was about how likely recruiters are to look at a candidate's social media profile. And maybe, I don't know if this is surprising for you or not, 93%. So the correct answer is the last one, 90%. Basically, employers will look at candidates' social media profiles. 93% do. So that's important, because they need to, be giving a professional perspective on any public-facing information they've got on their social media profile, because employers, recruiters will look at it. If you like, it's another way of them trying to find out a more three-dimensional picture of the individual. Yeah, it's another way of trying to build up that picture. So they will look at it, and any publicly facing information, that's accessible to people, needs to look like it's sort of their professional, not silly, and not irresponsible. Okay, the last question: applicant tracking software will eliminate 3/4 of applicants. So the correct answer is C. 75%, 3/4 will be eliminated by the automatic tracking software, or can be. Yeah, obviously it depends on the setting, but that just goes to show that that can be a very quick way for employers to get rid of, if they had 100 applicants, they get rid of 75% of them straight away without even having read them. Then they've got 25 CVs to read instead of 100. So it's quite an attractive way for an employer to do it. Okay, so the purpose of that exercise, it's based on just some information that I picked up off the net. You can find similar information. I'll just show it to you now if I've got it to hand. Here we go. Fun facts about recruitment. It's going to go on the Moodle, so you can have access to that, but you can find out similar sorts of information that's more specific to the Lao context. And what you can do with something like this is you can invent a little quiz like I just did just now. You can invent a quiz, what are the answers, what do you think about this, what do you think about that? But the important thing is that it's a different way of putting that information in front of your students in a more fun way. And it's not, the idea is you're not looking for a high score, because there's no way anybody would kind of know this information, but it's getting them to engage with, oh, well, yeah, employers will look at my social media profile, it's getting them to engage with the different sorts of issues that are surrounding job applications and recruitment in a more fun way, and they'll be surprised at the results. I mean, when I did this with a different group, a different university group, I don't think anybody thought that the average time spent by recruiters looking at a CV was going to be 5 to 7 seconds. But that's what the research shows. So it's just another way of just making it a little bit more fun, and getting students to sort of engage and to sort of be maybe surprised at what the results show about the different ways that different factors can operate within the sort of phase of recruitment. Okay. Right, let me just get you back again to see if I've got anything. So I'm just picking up a comment in the chat box. If students have sufficient soft skills, they can learn easily, successfully. People's soft skills can solve problems effectively. They perform very well in organisations. After soft skills, critical thinking. Yes, absolutely, I agree with that. And actually, that brings us quite nicely onto the next part of the seminar. So the quiz we've just done, I've just done it with you on Zoom. You could do that with your students on Zoom in the way that I've done, sorry, on Google. You can do it in a poll in Zoom where they can actually do it online as well. So you can do it like that too. So there's different ways of doing that. You can do polls in the Moodle, but you can't do them online at the same time, from what I can gather. So that just means it's a bit more clunky to do it that way. But you could do it remotely. You can do it in class. You can have a bit of fun with that. So you can use that in the information I've given you. You can research your information, just make a bit of a quiz. So it's another student exercise suggested. Okay, what I want to move on to next is about graduate employers' perspectives in Lao, based on research that's done. Now, you remember we talked about the tracer studies that your university has done and every university in Lao has done, and these tracer studies, they looked at the graduates over the last 5 years going into employment, and they also talked to the employers. So they did quite a lot of work with the employers as well, and it's the employer bit that I want to focus on today. Now, as I said before, I think you should have that report to hand in Lao language if you can, and try and get your students kind of to engage with it, because they are, they're undergraduates. They should be used to using sources of information and extracting information from that. So what I'm going to look at now, there is a summary report that brings together the reports from all 4 universities in Lao. So I suggest that you use, when you do this with your students, you use your university one. So you use your NUOL one, but I've used the collective one that's across the whole universities. And I've tried to look at the sorts of information about what employers are looking for, what employers' perspectives are, that's in that summary report. And I'm going to do a presentation that just sort of takes you through some of those points. It may be different in the NUOL one, so have a look at that one as well. But this is what the summary report was showing, and this picks up the points that some of you are making about soft skills for employers. So we'll talk about that now. Okay. So this is for the whole of Lao, not just for NUOL. So combining results from all 4 Lao universities. So a large number of employers want foreign languages. 80% of employers are interested in foreign languages in their recruits. Mostly English, but also Chinese, Vietnamese. And this begs the question, if foreign languages are so valued by employers, how could your students improve their language skills when they've got the chance while they're at university? I'm sure you may well have formal English classes for teaching, but even so, there's plenty of online courses. There's free online courses about learning English. They could be taking conversational classes. They could be doing formal study, maybe with the university, maybe with an outside organisation. Even just watching TVs and movies in English, that helps. I've met plenty of people who speak very good English. When I ask them how they learnt it, they say, I was watching, American TV or, English speaking movies. So there'll be other ways as well. But that's something to maybe for them to think about, your students to think about now while they're preparing to go into employment, realising how important foreign languages actually are to employers. So now we come on to soft skills. So 70% of employers, and this is what they've said when they've been asked, they want good team players. team playing is important. And it's important to think, well, okay, we talked about the foreign languages and how they could be developing their foreign language skills. They also want problem solvers. They want people who aren't going to always need to have direction in order to solve little problems in day-to-day working. They want people who can solve problems. So those are quite key soft skills. So let's think briefly about how they could develop these soft skills, but then also more as importantly, how could they show employers that they've actually got them? So things like team projects, working together in a team, with maybe different roles and responsibilities, working through disagreements and, people who are lazy and people who are bossy and, all that sort of thing, dealing with, different personalities within the team. Team projects, so they go away and they actually have to focus and do it all within the team. Group working class, learning to be respectful of others, to give space for others, to encourage people who are shy to contribute, all those sorts of things within group working class. And we've certainly talked about some examples of how you could be doing group working class. Also, real problems in their professional area, in the area of their major, for the students to solve. So the focus of the project solving real life problems with all its inconsistencies and frustrations and things don't work perfectly as they perhaps do in a sort of ideal scientific experiment. And there'll be other approaches as well. So to be thinking about how they can A, develop those sorts of soft skills, and B, how they can actually show them in their letter of application CVs. So, if an employer says in the person specification they want a good team player, that should straight away tick something in the applicant's mind to think, oh, right, in my letter of application, I need to have a really good example of how I've been a good team player. What do I tend to do in a team? What experience have I got in that? Not reams and reams, but literally a couple of sentences that shows that they have worked in teams and worked successfully in teams and how they contributed to that. And also they need to prepare answers for that for their interview. Their answers about maybe another thing should be able to bring in examples, or at least one example, how they've been working in teams, and how they've been successful in working in teams, how they've solved unusual problems. If they had a project, maybe their graduation project was a real life problem to do with a real life situation in work, how they tackled those sorts of realities. That gives them a good real example of how they can actually talk through it. Okay, continuing then with soft skills. So we've now got a third of employers looking for good communication skills, leadership, and innovation. So over to you, I suppose. How do you help your students develop these soft or 21st century skills? And secondly, how do they show employers that they have them? How do they demonstrate that they've got them? And just to finish with, so 70% of employers think their graduate employees have the skills they expected, but 84% of employers train their new graduate employees to fill the gaps between their knowledge and skills and those needed for the job. So I suppose the message from that is that most employers are reasonably satisfied with what they get in terms of their graduate recruits, but they know that there's a big gap between what they actually need and what they get from university. So they fill that gap with training. So that's, I think, quite an interesting, quick sort of summary of some of the key points that came out of this combined study, bringing all the universities of Laos results, tracer study results together. So I've got a suggestion for how you might do this with your students. I'm just going to try and stop sharing, but I've lost my mouse. My mouse has stopped working. Here we go. Stop sharing, and then I've completely lost you. Here we go. Right, I'm back again. Okay, so an example student exercise which I put down in the handbook, and I'll just talk you through that. I would suggest that if you want to sort of get your students involved with the tracer study, which I would suggest is a good idea, if you provide them with copies of the tracer study in Lao language, and get them into groups. You know, we talked about the importance of teamwork, so group work, this is an example of that. And I would suggest they get maybe work in groups of 5. The bigger the group, the more difficult it is for the students to cooperate together, because the more they get disparate views and all that sort of thing. It's relatively straightforward to work in a pair, and less so in 3, and certainly less so in 5. And as the groups get bigger, it gets more difficult, more challenging. But that's the reason for doing it, you know, so they handle those sorts of issues. So you ask each group, you give them a topic that they have to explore using the tracer study. So I put some examples down here, but you know, you can come up with anything. So one of the examples is, you know, to focus on soft skills. Soft skills are the topic of the day. So which soft skills do employers value most in graduate employees? And then you could turn it on this side and say, which soft skills do graduates think are most important? Because there's information about both of those in the tracer studies, but they've got to look for it. So they have to find out the information. So you could ask one group to focus on soft skills. You could ask one group to focus on what graduate employees like most about their jobs and least about their jobs. You know, what do they enjoy? What do they not enjoy? So there's some ideas. I think there's about 4 or 5 topics down there as ideas to get you started. But you could ask them to research any aspect, but give them a sort of fairly narrow focus for each group. And the idea is that they have to search into the tracer study and pick out the relevant information. And they have to prepare a short presentation for the rest of the class. So maybe maximum 3 PowerPoint slides. You only want a couple of minutes on this. So they've got to organise the information, they've got to find the information, they've got to organise the information, and they've got to make a presentation from that, maybe, as I say, 3 PowerPoint slides, and then they've got to present their findings to the rest of the class. And then they note down the most important learning points for them. And you might want to do that at the end of the class presentations. So you ask each student to note down the 3 most important learning points they've got from that. Okay, so those 3 important learning points, I'm sort of skipping now between, you've got the group, they've done the analysis on their topic, they've prepared the 3 PowerPoint presentations, you've brought the class back together, each of the groups has made their presentation. If you have a group of 30, so you may have, in groups of 5, you'll have 6 presentations, 6 short presentations. Then at the end of that, you say, okay, each student individually, so now looking back to working individually, note down the 3 most important learning points you've got from these presentations. You know, 3 things that are most important to you personally that you've got from this, that you understand now that you didn't understand before. And then the next kind of stage from that is about individual action. Yeah, so you've got your 3 learning points. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to actually take? What action are you going to take in order to, you know, maximize your chances of getting a job afterwards? So it might be, for example, going back to the soft skills example. Oh wow, you know, I didn't realize that being a good team player was so important to employers. So I'm going to increase my teamwork experience, or I'm going to make sure that my teamworking skills are clear on my CV, or something like that. So it sort of takes it back. Yeah, they had fun. They worked in the group. You know, they've looked at all different sorts of aspects of the tracer study. They've told each other about it. So they've done a bit of presenting skills. But then, actually, what have we done this for? We've done this to find out, you know, what's come out of it. It's important for us. And then what action am I going to take? Because in the end, it's them that's going to get the job. So that's a suggested example of a student exercise, which obviously you can amend, you can change, you can do what you want with, but it's just a suggested type of approach you might want to take. And just to sort of take it a stage further, just wanted to think about what we've actually done there in terms of soft skills. Yeah. So we've done group work. We've got groups of 5 working together, which is reasonably challenging for them to do. Yeah. So we've done some group work. They've had to do some analysis, research analysis, because they've only used the tracer study. So it's a limited amount. They haven't had to go and find lots of papers on different things. So they've only had the one report, but they've got to pick out the right bits for them. They've got to analyse it. They've done communication skills because they've had to prepare a PowerPoint presentation, short PowerPoint presentation, agree on it. And then they've had to present their findings, or at least one of them have had to present their findings. So they've had to plan communication and make communication. So they've done communication skills. When you get to the individual stage of what are the 3 most important learning points for them, then that's a bit of internal reflection. Yeah, so reflection and sort of thinking processes, and then coming out with individual actions at the end. What are they going to be doing differently? What are they going to start working on from their point of view? What are they going to remember to do when they do their CV? Are they actually going to start going to those English classes that they find such a pain? You know, all those sorts of things. Okay, so it's down there. I have put down a distance learning adaptation for this as well, which I think is based on working in smaller groups, because that's, if they're trying to work electronically with each other at a distance, that's more difficult. But you could basically do the same thing, but in smaller groups. They can have access to an electronic version of the report. Pairs find it easier to work together in terms of communicating and sort of developing their presentation. And then they could do a short PowerPoint presentation like I'm doing on the seminar with you today. Okay, so that's kind of a sort of fairly as I say, it's not just about what they're finding out from the report, it's all the skills that they're using by going through that exercise, which helps to develop soft skills as well as finding out what's important to employers. Okay. So moving on, I want to go to formal and informal expectations. And the principle for this is getting students to think about when you become an employee, you're different from being a student. And there will be certain things which are set out in your contract of employment, in your letter of appointment. And then there are other things which aren't set out, which are kind of informal expectations. So, for example, you know, a formal expectation might be that you work 37 hours a week, but nobody might say, oh yeah, and by the way, you've got to start at 8 o'clock in the morning and you've got to finish at 5 or whatever it is. You know, nobody might actually say what the set hours are. And this is coming back to the idea of culture. We were talking about company culture earlier on. This is something that people have to learn when they go into a company, or they learn by talking to people who are already in the company. And it's just getting them to think about what those sorts of things might be. So another example might be nobody tells you what you have to wear, but when you go to the company on the first day, everybody is dressed in black, for example, I don't know, or everybody's dressed in white, or whatever it is, yeah, or everybody's very formally dressed, or everybody's very informally dressed, and nobody's actually said that to you and told you that's what you have to do, but it's something that you pick up when you see and you sort of think, oh right, oh gosh, you know, everybody's in very formal colours, very, you know, they're in grey or they're in white or in black, and I've come in a bright red top. I'm not going to do that again. Yeah. So these are sorts of, and there's a whole series of different signalling things that enable you to find out more about the company culture. And we all do it all the time. And the students have their own culture. University lecturers will have their culture. You know, there's different cultures that's influencing all the time. But what I was trying to do in the purpose of this exercise and to talk about is formal and informal expectations. And my kind of interpretation of this is that the formal expectations, if you actually look at a typical contract of employment or letter of appointment, it has very little information in it. It says you'll work this many hours, you'll have this much holiday, and you'll get paid this much. Yeah. So those are kind of like the formal expectations, and they might be underpinned by legislative requirements to, you know, act in a responsible way to others, or, you know, health and safety regulations and all that sort of thing. But actually there's very little that's actually formally set out. And a lot of the expectations, the cultural stuff, is underneath that, and I've likened it to an iceberg. So just an exercise to get students started to think about this is a sort of a brainstorming type of exercise. We did brainstorming before. I can't remember what we were doing it with now, but we have done brainstorming before, where you do a yellow sticky and you sort of just put things down and nothing's wrong. And so you could get them to do a brainstorming exercise. And you could either do this electronically. We can have a go at this now if it works. You could either do this electronically on a call like this, or you could do it in the classroom. Much easier in the classroom, because you just draw an iceberg on the board and get students to focus on different aspects of the job, and then they come up and put their yellow stickies in. Is it a formal expectation, which is the visible part of the iceberg above the level of the water, or is it an informal one, which is below? So I've listed down a whole load of things. So could it be about use of IT, dress, personal appearance, the volume of work? It could be about holidays. It could be about health and safety. It could be about working with others, respecting colleagues, and that sort of thing. It could be about the standard of work. It could be about honesty and professional discretion. So there's loads of different aspects of work which are to do with the culture, which are not necessarily, sort of set down formally in your contract. Nobody actually necessarily tells you about them. You kind of have to find them out as you're working there. So if you got the idea of that, I'm going to try and share. I did an iceberg before. Let me just see if I can get my iceberg back. Let me see if I can get my iceberg back. Here we go. Okay, so hopefully you can see my iceberg. So I've got an iceberg here, and this is the formal expectations here and the informal expectations. I mean, typically an iceberg is sort of 10% above the waterline and 90% below the waterline. That's, there's a load of ice down there that you can't see. So I was just going to invite you as a bit of an exercise to just, as you would do with the students, think about some of the topics. Let's start with dress and personal presentation. So things like hair, clothing, piercings, makeup, what sort of expectations might be formal, what might be informal. Down here, you can put a yellow sticky. Yeah, if you just click on the yellow sticky here, then it gives you a new yellow sticky. And I think I've given everybody permission to post things up there. So it might be expected to wear a business suit, whatever the equivalent is in Lao. Is anybody going to tell you that? No, they aren't. Yeah, so I was going to invite you to add yellow stickies if you can, and to maybe put these down here. So I'll just put in another one while you're having a think about it. Hopefully I'm not stopping everybody else doing it. But something like number of days holiday, for example. So that's possibly going to be up in the formal category. But when you take your holiday, it's probably down here somewhere. Somebody will tell you that you can't take your holiday during school holidays because everybody who's got children wants to take them then. So if you haven't got children, if you haven't got a family, then you're expected to take your holidays during term time. That's a typical thing that happens in the UK. So there's a lot of competition for people, because most people have families, to take their holidays when the schools are on holiday as well. So I was just going to invite you to have a bit of a play with that. And this is a tool that you could use with your students in terms of using yellow stickies in a bit of an exercise. And maybe get them to do some thinking beforehand. I've just dropped you in this quite quickly, but get them to do a bit of thinking beforehand so that they've got a bit more idea about what they would be doing. And if they're focusing on particular aspects, so for example, something like IT, let's do IT. So I'll put in one about, so IT packages. So if we save that one, so I put down IT packages, and by that I'm sort of meaning it might say in the person specification that somebody needs to be able to use Excel and Word and whatever. So they might need to know about IT packages. But one thing that possibly won't be clearly specified is not using the company internet for personal use during working hours. Yeah. So that's probably fairly informal, you know, and the company might monitor that, and you might get reprimanded if you're on Facebook and chatting away to your friends all the time. And when you get young people into a workplace environment, just the whole sort of thing about actually you're at work and you're meant to be working can be quite alien to them, because they're used to being on the phone chatting to the friends and don't realise that actually that's frowned upon in the workplace. So I don't know if anybody feels brave enough to do a couple of yellow stickies and bung them on there. I'll give you a minute or two. I'll just have a drink of water while. Yeah, brilliant. Even if you don't feel brave enough to post anything, have a go at using the yellow stickies. It's. I mean, I'm not sort of the most tech savvy person in the world, and it's relatively straightforward, and just have a bit of a play with it. When we finished, have a play with it and see if it's something that you can use with your students if you're still trying to do distance teaching and learning. Yeah, channel communications in the company, good one. Okay, that's great. Hopefully, at least it's exposed you to the tool, and basically we've sort of done the exercise electronically that I would do with students in a classroom, ideally face to face. But I think the thing to do if you were going to do this with students is that you would give them a particular topic to focus on. The pair of students, to think about. We've just done it kind of fairly randomly and sort of what's occurred to us as we're thinking about it. But obviously, we've worked in organisations. We kind of know about company culture, organisational culture, a bit more than students do. But they have a chance to sort of think about it, and it's getting them to think about different aspects of work as well. Work is not just as simple as straightforward as you go along in the morning and you come back in the evening and you do the work in between. It's not as simple as that. There's a lot more to it than that. So hopefully that's been a useful exercise, and I will now attempt to get you back again. Okay, can you see me now rather than the Padlet? Yes, no? Maybe I need to shut the Padlet down. What I've done there. Okay, I think I might try to share this as much as I can. I don't dare shut it down in case I lose you. So I'll just go back to this. Hopefully you can see me. If not, you've got a view of the whiteboard. So that's a whiteboard, and you can do various different things on it. You can write on it, you can type on it, you can do that yellow sticky exercise for a brainstorming exercise on it as well. Okay, so that would be another exercise to do with your students around formal and informal expectations at work. Now, the last thing I wanted to cover, which I think is if you only do one thing about employer perceptions with your students, this to me is the most important thing that you should do. And it's probably, well, I don't know how realistic it is for you in Lao, but it is very valuable, and it's very valuable for the whole process of finding a job. And that is to get an external person, an employer or recruiter, in to talk to your students about how they recruit new employees. So if you've got somebody that who you could ask to come and do that, either do it face to face, ideally. In the days of COVID and lockdown, you might have to ask them to do it on Zoom. They might be more willing to do it electronically because it's less hassle for them. But back in face-to-face classrooms, if you get somebody in and tell them what you want them to do, and my suggestion that I put down in the handbook is, to sort of for them to talk through the process of how they recruit people like your students. How do they, where do they put their adverts? What are they looking for in terms of the CVs? What soft skills are they looking for, and why? Why do they need the soft skills? What sort of languages they're wanting? What IT competencies? What sorts of personal attributes are they particularly valuing as well? So don't just say to an employer, "Oh, will you come in and talk to my students?" Give them a bit of a framework to say, "Please, can you tell how you recruit? What other skills, non-academic skills, do you value? What particular personalities are you looking for?" You know what I mean? And that's give them a sort of framework which they can cover in their talk, because employers, recruiters they're not teachers. They're not necessarily used to sort of talking systematically about these sorts of things. But asking them to talk to your students is a very valuable experience for your students, and you might learn quite a lot as well. And you're getting it from, literally, we say in English, the horse's mouth, the genuine source, of what they're actually looking for. If you can't get an employer, or alongside the employer, not alongside at the same time, but as well as the employer, I would also suggest it would be useful if you can get one of your ex-students, one of your alumni, to come and talk to the class about their experiences of getting a job. So you're seeing it then from the employer's perspective, and also from the perspective of somebody who's been where they are now, a couple of years further down the line. So maybe getting somebody who's been in work for 2 or 3 years. So they're not just a fresh recruit, but they've actually been in there for 2 or 3 years, to talk about how they got their job, how they found the first few months in work. And your students are probably more likely to feel able to sort of ask questions and to chat to somebody who's been a student recently. and find out more about it from their point of view. So as I say, if you do one thing about employer perspectives, get somebody in to talk to your students, would be, I think, the most important thing you could do for them. Okay, so I'm going to try and turn off my whiteboard and see if I've got anything in the chat. Okay, so if anybody's got any comments, questions, suggestions, the last thing I have to do is just go through the tasks that you have to do between now and the next session, which is basically, review what we've covered, look at the documents, look at the handbook, look at the documents I'm going to put in Moodle, plan your teaching, how you're going to cover employer perspectives with your students, get your resources together, make up a quiz perhaps, design your whiteboard if you want to do that on Google, get your task documents in an electronic shared place if you're still doing it at a distance. Then deliver your teaching and learning exercise, assign tasks to students, give them a deadline, get them to feedback on it. And then after the session, do the normal reflection. You reflect on how you felt it went, what could have gone better, what went really well, what you'd want to do more of. And also ask your students how they found the experience as well. What was difficult, what worked well for them, was it too easy, was it too difficult, how should you adjust it next time? And then next time we'll come back and see how you got on with doing that. It's difficult for me to ask for feedback at the minute because I know that you are all trying to do your stuff at a distance, which makes it more difficult with your students. And I'm sure you're under pressure to cover core material as well. So I realise it's difficult, and I salute you for the work that you're doing at the minute with your students, because I know it's not easy when everybody's disrupted and at home. Okay, so that's what I wanted to cover today. As I say, the handbook section is in Moodle. I will put the other documents in Moodle. They'll be there later on today, so you can access everything through Moodle. And we are amazingly just about within time. So I don't know if anybody's got any comments, questions, if they want to put anything in the chat in the last few minutes, or ask a question or say something. Please feel free. I just realised I didn't put my captions on today. I'm sorry about that. I forgot. Just if you're going to ask a question, make sure you turn your microphone on.
Dr. Pam, what is
Yes.
What is the typical duration for job interview?
Typical, sorry, what?
Typical duration for job interview. The length of time for interview.
Oh, duration, right? Okay, yeah. Okay, normally about 30 or 40 minutes. Yeah. I think if you come out after 20 minutes, it's a bit quick, and maybe they weren't that interested in you. And if they keep you for an hour, then perhaps either your answers were too long, yeah, or maybe they were very interested in you and wanted to, really test you. So I would say 30 to 40 minutes. That's enough. It's quite hard work being interviewed, but it's also quite hard work interviewing people, yeah? And interviewers can't really keep their focus, yeah, for much longer. But it does depend on the type of interview as well. So we do interviews next week, and we go talk about things like group interviews, yeah, where they're interviewing a whole group together, yeah? And sometimes you have panel interviews where it's very, very formal, and you may have 10 people interviewing you, yeah, and so they all have to have time to talk to you. So these are unusual situations, but they do happen. So it does depend a little bit on the type of interview, but a normal interview, I would say, is like one candidate, maybe 2 or 3 interviewers, yeah, and maybe 30, 40 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pam.
Okay, you're very welcome. Thank you for the question. Any other questions or comments? I can't see anything in the chat. So I'm assuming that we are all okay. So next time we do interview skills, yeah, and some practical exercises of getting students to work and practice interviews, different types of interviews, different types of interview question, that sort of thing. Okay, 1 more minute for any other questions or comments.
Dr. Pham, I have one question. I just heard about your presentation. You say we should teach the student about the soft skills. So what do you mean for soft skill? How many kind of skill? Can you explain about that?
Yeah, sure. So soft skills are kind of like, they are like interpersonal, well, they're kind of soft skills. How can you explain what soft skills are? Okay, so it's things like problem solving, yeah, how to solve a problem, yeah, how to communicate well with other people, how to work as part of a team, how to be innovative, yeah, how to think critically, so how to analyze situations and how to sort of think about things in a different way. So they are things which are not related to particular academic study. They are kind of like the personal skill. They're not really personal skills. That's not really fair. But they are kind of like the transferable skills, the skills that can move between different situations. Yeah. So you might describe time management as being a soft skill, being able to manage your time properly. So there are lots of soft skills. We talked about the ones that are most important to employers, yeah, today, yeah. So those are kind of quite sort of crucial ones. But it's about ensuring your students are rounded, yeah. They are able to transfer their skills into the workplace. Now, on soft skills, this is actually something I was going to ask the group about, because somebody mentioned at an earlier session that they were being trained on delivering soft skills. Now, I have a series of objectives as part of my SHEP project. And one of them is to help the universities develop soft skills in students. So I am planning next. Oh, when does your semester finish, by the way? When does your semester finish?
I think in late August. I think.
August, yeah, late August, yeah.
So do you have a holiday then?
I don't think so, because we have holiday during lockdown already.
Oh, I see.
We still during the summer, the holiday, we still work another job.
Yeah.
But not for teaching.
Right. Okay. Understand. Okay. Okay. So anyway, I was going to say, because I thought you had your next semester started in September. So my plan was to offer a similar program on soft skill developing, on developing soft skills in students, yeah, next semester, yeah, for those who would find that useful. Because the key thing about soft skills is that you develop them in students not by teaching them. You don't tell them how to be a good team player, but you get them to work in teams in a certain way, yeah, to get them to be a good team player and to understand about working in teams. So some of what we're doing now in employability is actually helping to develop students' soft skills. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The fact that they are doing group work is part of team building. The fact that you're getting to do micro teaching. Yeah. And we talked about the presentation. Yeah. The three PowerPoint slides and presenting that to the class. So that's again about communication, different types of communication. So really students develop their soft skills by using them, using them and using them in tasks that you give them to do. So that's how you help them develop it. So some of the, well, all of the student-centered activities that I've suggested in the employability program will help to develop soft skills. But I guess the key thing for you is to then think about how you develop soft skills in your normal teaching, when you're teaching your academic subject, how you get students to develop analytical skills and all that sort of thing. So that's what I was hoping to move on to, but I haven't spoken to anybody officially about that at all. It was just an idea, okay? But somebody did mention that they were doing some training on soft skills already, and I was going to ask about that. I don't know if I think it was a lady who said that she'd been doing soft skills. Maybe they aren't on the call today. So anyway, I hope that answers your question about soft skills.
Yeah, Dr. Palm. So I understand that the skill all belong to soft. So how do you think? How many kind of skill? Is some hard skill as well, or how do you think?
I don't.
Sorry.
I don't think it's necessarily a number. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I mean, if you look at the theory of soft skills, there are a certain number, maybe 6, maybe 10, but actually many things could be described as soft skills. Yeah. So, handling disputes, handling arguments, could be seen as being, resolving difficulties, that's using different types of soft skills. So I don't think it's an absolute, I mean, in theory, some people say there's 6 soft skills or there's 10 soft skills, Personally, I think there are lots of soft skills. I think the thing to do is to focus on the ones that are most important to employers, and they have told us in the tracer studies what they most value, in students. And basically it's about becoming mature, rounded adults, functioning in the world. It's that sort of area is what you're talking about, or what we're talking about with soft skills. So I don't think there isn't a set number. To me, there is no set number. But concentrate on the ones that are most important. Look at your tracer study, see what your employers are looking for. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Oh, okay, Dr. Santi, thank you very much. Yes, okay, because you've got a problem on your microphone, that's fine. Okay. Any other questions or comments before we finish?
Doctor?
Hello?
Hello. Yeah, my name is Linda La. I just wonder that can we also, I think in the academic class, we also have those soft skills.
Of course.
Maybe we let them make assignments, but many times that students lean on their friends. Like they don't work in a team. They may be team of 4, but only one student or 2 students that work on the project, something like that. I just want to ask that maybe how can we motivate them to involve in the project? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I understand the issue entirely. Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that you could do is, as part of the assessment, you could ask that the students evaluate how they contributed to the work. Yeah, so they could do a self-evaluation. So they can evaluate what they did, but they can also evaluate their team members. Do you see what I mean? So in other words, the actual participation in the teamwork, the actual effort that they put in, becomes part of the actual assessment of how they completed it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, doctor. But I'm waiting for your next program. The soft skill development.
Okay, no, that's fine. I mean, it is a problem.
Yeah, because
But it's also a problem in employment as well. You know, this is not something that students are going to find or not. They're not, you know, that just exist in the classroom. It's a problem of life. You know,
something
how do you
that yeah.
how do you get your teammates? How do you motivate your teammates to contribute? You know,
Yeah.
how do you organise the work? How do you make sure that it's fairly divided? You know, do you have a leader? You know, do you appoint a leader? Do you agree a leader? You know, this is part of the whole thing about working in teams. You know, you as the lecturer can't solve it for them. They have to behave. You know, they have to sort of decide how they're going to work that out, because this is a real life problem that they're going to come across all the way through their lives. You know, sorry to be negative about it, but it's, you know, there's certain mechanisms that you could think of that they could decide to have a leader who allocates the tasks, or they could have a process whereby they agree who's going to do what, and they've got to ensure that that's fair. Do you see what I mean? You could give them some tools that they could use, yeah, to make sure they're actually actively managing the process, and or you can put it in the evaluation.
It's like life development. Can I say that? It's for lifetime to develop your soft skills.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
think I agree with Dr. Pam that regarding to the teamwork, we supposed to show the student. I mean, in the soft skill, I think Ajahn Ladongchan know very well, because they also try to train the student with the soft skill, because we got in the soft skill if we want them to work in a team. Well, who we are going to include, like you say, we have the leadership one who's going to be the leader, what role they're supposed to take in each one. So we just set them, maybe for the first time, they're supposed to just focus on their own, but the second time, they are familiar with what they are doing and they're going to get used to that. But you are the one you're supposed to be, I mean, like you say, you are the lecturer, you are the one who have to play the most important role to show them what you really want the student to do. I think this one is the most important things.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Thank you very much for all the comments and questions that people have come up with. I'll just give you another 30 seconds if you want to bring anything up. Okay, so I think that's probably us done for today. So good luck with the teaching on employer perspectives. And I do hope, I keep my fingers crossed that you will get out of your lockdown. You'll be back to normal next week. Good that you've only got one case. Cases in the UK are going up again. So we thought we were coming out of lockdown, but maybe we aren't. So there we go. Anyway, so take care, everybody, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye bye.